Welcome to the Adversity to Advantage podcast. This is the place to learn how to get through your worst rock bottom and start to embrace adversity. I'm your host, Petra Belzebor. I'm a therapist and a life coach, but my biggest learning is from my own rock bottom. My story includes being raised in a cult, dealing with depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and alcoholism. But along the way, I've learned to turn my entire life around to one of success, joy, and fulfillment. So in this podcast, I'll be talking to people from all walks of life who've done the same. I'll be teasing out the skills and tools necessary, as well as using my own experience to teach you how to turn your adversity into your biggest advantage. Welcome everyone to the Adversity to Advantage podcast. I'm very excited today. We've got Wendy Sage, who is a coach. She's a counselor, a facilitator, and she helps people offers them skills and accesses new perspectives on their lives to help them navigate the challenges and adversity in everyday life. Welcome to the show, Wendy.
Thank you so much.
So thanks so much for being here. So fill in the blanks for us. Tell the listeners a little bit about what you're passionate about in work and in life.
What I'm passionate about? Well, I'm passionate of the work that I do. I love the work that I do, and I'm passionate in developing it further, developing myself, and working with people. I love working with people.
That sort of excites you?
Yes, actually, it is the bit about it. I really believe that everybody has gifts. And everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and it's accessing those gifts and accessing those strengths, and being aware of our weaknesses and being okay with them. And I love working with people, and they're the moment that they realize that in themselves, and I learn so much from everybody I work with.
Absolutely. I find that every single person I work with, no matter how far along I am in the journey, teaches me something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I also find it with these podcast interviews. It's just the engagement with people that I'll just listen to somebody's story and learn so much for me right at the moment that I need it. So no pressure.
Okay, thanks so much.
So Wendy,
and vice versa.
Wow.
It's great to learn from you as well.
Hopefully, it will be a two-way street. So give us a little bit of context. Tell us a little bit just about your childhood, your parents. Do you think the education system and growing up sort of prepared you for life as an adult and the challenges we would face?
Well, I grew up in Montreal, Canada. Mm-hmm. I the youngest daughter.
Out of how many?
2. I have one older sister and myself, and it was my mom and my dad.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had a really nice upbringing. Family life. Lots of cousins and aunts and uncles nearby. I think it was great bringing the younger sister, because I used to watch my sister make mistakes and then learn my way around. Nice. So I learned to navigate really early on. Like if she came home really late at night and got into trouble, I would then know what to say when I came home really late at night. So I wouldn't get in as much trouble, that kind of a thing. And we were close family. And I suppose my parents, I don't know how great their relationship was always, but when, after 30 years of marriage, they decided to divorce. And I think at that time, I might have been in my late teens or early 20s. I can't really remember. And I think that, yeah, it was a hard, it was different, it was just so different. So my mother was coping with her own stuff. My father was coping with his own stuff. At that point, we all had moved from Montreal to Florida, and I was living in Florida and I was working in Florida. My sister then chose to move back to Montreal. And I suppose it was difficult. It was a difficult time. So I probably had to learn coping mechanisms at that stage. Independence, more independence. And then I met an Englishman, and as you do when you're young and you think, oh, great, just take the next adventure. Mm-hmm. And I moved to the UK. I moved to London.
Right. When you were going through that sort of challenging time with your parents splitting up, and you talk about coping mechanisms, did you veer to any sort of unhealthy ways of coping during that time?
Well, I always just put it down to being young and having fun.
Sure. I know what that's like.
But actually, they may well have been coping mechanisms.
Escapism.
Yeah. Maybe the one too many drink, that kind of thing. I mean, I never had alcoholic problems, but it was a wild lifestyle in my early 20s, I guess, if I look back at it now.
Yeah. So you fell in love.
Yeah, I fell in love, moved to England. So I think that was my very, really first learning curve, a bigger learning curve, in that all of a sudden I was away from all the people that I loved and away from the people who loved me. Different country, different culture. At least the language was the same. And I had to cope. I had to dig deep in my own resources and navigate my way around day-to-day life, even from where to buy groceries, where to go to the dry cleaner, how to make new friends. And I think I surprised myself at my own strength in just taking each day, adapting, adjusting, accepting, and just taking each day as it came.
And where do you think you learned that skill about being independent and taking each day as it came?
Well, I do think that part of it has to do with your DNA. I think that, I don't know, we're born, some people are born where your glass is half full, and some people have your glass is half empty. Yeah. And I'm definitely quite a very positive person. Okay. So I think that has a little bit to do with DNA. And I think intention, I set my intention to making a nice life for myself. This is where I chose to live. And so I've just got to get on with it. So I suppose strength. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it sounds like over time you built up some support networks, work prospects, and things like that in order to settle into a new place.
Well, actually, come to think of it, I was very fortunate because I had some really good friends who I was able to keep in close contact with. These were friends in North America and who regularly visited me in the UK. And actually, one very good friend of mine who also at the time, she left Canada and then she moved. When I pretty much moved to the UK, she moved to Israel. And so we kept in contact and were able to share our frustrations or any emotions or feelings that we went through, we were able to share. And I guess that feeling of not being alone, of recognizing the same things in each other and being supportive of each other. So I had a good support network.
Because it can be so isolating. I work with some expat communities and traveled so much growing up and then moved here when I was 22. So the idea of, having to build from scratch in a new place is really challenging, not understanding quite the culture or the way things work. But so it can really add to your strength in dealing with that, if we call it adversity in its looser term. Being able to deal with that can really strengthen your resolve and your tenacity. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that my husband at the time had a big network of friends. And although
they accepted me warmly. They welcomed me warmly. So although they might not have been exactly, the same kind of people as me with the same way of thinking or even the same age group, but I had that.
Sure. You were surrounded by possibility to connect with people.
Yeah, I was surrounded, and I was always, and I learned about the culture and I learned about the English way from them. So I'm really grateful to that, and they're still good friends of mine to this day.
Lovely. So as you know, the theme of the podcast is around adversity, and we're beginning to touch on some things now. I refer to things like having a rock bottom or a crash point because I'm really curious about, how that impacts us, and do we need sort of rock bottoms in order to push ourselves to living our full potential or not? So just in thinking of those terms, adversity, rock bottom, what comes up for you in the next stages of your life?
Well, wow.
Well.
Yeah, I certainly hit rock bottom. I had my first, we got married and I had my first child and life was wonderful.
Bliss, yeah.
Yeah. Well, bliss is a strong word. It was mostly good.
Yes.
But I really enjoyed having my son, and I met a lot of other new mothers, so that opened up a new world, and that was great. And then it was like, let's have another child, and I was 30 weeks pregnant and ran into some difficulties, discomfort, pain, etc. And to make a long story short, they did an emergency C-section. They saw that the child was in distress. There was something not quite right. So they did an emergency C-section, and it was a little girl. She was 2 pounds, 10 ounces, and she was put in an incubator. And at the time, they didn't know exactly if there was anything wrong, or they thought I had placenta failure, and that's why she was under distress. But her lungs weren't completely developed, and she couldn't breathe without a respirator. And at that time, because it's many years ago, respirators just work to an automatic pump. I think nowadays they are more aligned with a child's breath. But at that time, they were just on their electric pump. And so if she breathed in deeply or had an extra breath, everything would get out of sync and discombobulated, and she would stop breathing. And it happened several times, and the neonatal, specialist said to me, she just is not going to be able to breathe without the respirator. And, we really ought to, you have to make the decision.
Wow.
So we decided, with that information, to take her off the respirator, and she died in my arms, minutes or a minute later. So my world came crashing down. You're full of hope, you're full of dreams, you're having a baby, what's next? And she couldn't make it. And I think as a mother, you feel that you weren't able to protect your child. You weren't able to save your child. And that really took its toll on me.
Well, I'm thinking first of that decision, just being in that impossible situation where you've got to make that sort of horrific, implausible decision, not to mention sort of the after effects.
Well, when I would look at her in her little incubator, all hooked up, with tubes everywhere, and this respirator in her mouth, and her, my heart, ached, was ripped apart, and it just looked like she was suffering, and I didn't want her to suffer.
Yeah.
And I went very spiritual. It wasn't at that moment, but I guess, I just felt, okay, well, she just wasn't, meant to be, with me on earth. It was the universe, whatever it was. I don't know, there's no answer.
No, of course.
And sometimes there just is not an answer, and it's just acceptance.
Which is so hard.
She passed through me, and there was a lesson in that, in her passing through me.
What did you learn?
Well, I learned that things don't always go the way you expect them to go. You have to be. It sounds easy, and believe me, it's not easy. But, but it's like, life throws things at you, and how do we bounce back? Yeah. How can I be resilient to, because terrible things happen and we're out of control. That's what I learned. We don't have control.
Which is terrifying when it actually happens to you and you realize how little control you actually have.
Yeah. Yeah. How little control we actually have. Yeah.
Because we work so hard, don't we, to control all variables and to make plans and to imagine what things will be like. And then you get a curveball like that, and it's like you've never had to practice the resources for how someone deals with that. Yeah. Yeah.
And it was so many layers, like the biggest onion you ever saw, because and skin after skin, because there was the layer of my own grieving, my husband's grieving, my little boy who was 3 years old at the time. So coping, with all of that, and then, wanting to be supportive of him, wanting to be a good mom.
Yeah, you've still got to show up and make food and, for the other child. Yeah,
you still have to be that mom to the other child. Yeah, yeah. So it was actually the head of the nursery school that my son went to that said to me, what do you need to be that great mother you want to be to your son, whose name is Ben, by the way.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and who do you need to be, or what do you want to be that wife? So I had to support myself and work through myself to then, continue to be that mom.
And this may seem like a silly question because it's obvious with the trauma that occurred, but my question is, what was your lowest point? Because sometimes it isn't right when the trauma occurs, it's at a later date, or it's at a different time when you simply can't cope anymore.
I had two points. One point was, I can remember when we felt strong enough again, we went on a holiday. We went on a skiing holiday. So my husband, myself, and Ben. Mm-hmm. And I remember watching these young people playing pool or billiards in the bar. We went to France, and we were sitting in the bar in the evening, and they were having fun and they were laughing. And I remember feeling so sad and thinking, am I ever going to feel happy and carefree like that again? Mm-hmm. So that was one.
Yeah. Just a sense of hopelessness. Like, you've been through so much, and will you ever get back to enjoying an aspect of life? Yeah.
Carefree.
Yeah.
That carefree moment of being, not having experienced such a deep pain.
Right.
Or Yeah.
So you still have a naive sort of trust in the universe and other people and life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what was
full of hope, full of joy,
dreams.
full of dreams of the future. Yeah. Yeah. And, unfortunately, life does hit you, in different ways, as we were just saying. And so my experience of that. And the next point, so if we fast forward a year, I got pregnant again.
Oh, wow.
And I had a very careful and monitored.
I can imagine. Oh my God, how stressful must that have been?
Yeah, it was. But I felt in control. Actually, I really went overboard with scans and measuring.
I can imagine
the growth of the baby, and I was very fortunate. My GP was very involved this time, and it was well monitored anyway.
Sure.
And I had a gorgeous little girl who I felt, was my angel. Mm-hmm. Who, God gifted me with this beautiful little girl. But it was on her first birthday.
Yeah.
And when it was her first birthday, I cried and cried and cried because I felt so badly or sad or maybe guilt or just so many. I was full of emotion.
Of course.
That Elizabeth, the child who didn't make it, her name was Elizabeth, that she didn't get to
a birthday.
She wasn't able, to become a year old. She didn't have that. She wasn't able to experience that, and I felt so badly about it. But it was almost it passed through me. So I spent so much time crying and feeling so bad that I wasn't able to protect her enough to get to that point. But I then moved. I was okay. All of a sudden, it was like, okay, I was able to sort of lay her to rest and move forward. So I think it took me a year of living with my beautiful daughter Abby, and being able to accept that Elizabeth was gone. And I knew she was gone, and I accepted it, don't get me wrong, but just letting go. I let go of the sadness and embraced the joy of having my beautiful daughter that I have, and my son and my family life. And
that sounds beautiful, and of course easier said than done. And I'm curious about those couple of years in between, what sort of support or what got you through? Obviously it was something around the passing of time and possibly some healing with your daughter being born. And but what else was it? Did you end up asking for help? Did you get support from anywhere?
Yes, I did. I saw, I did go and see a bereavement counselor.
Okay.
And I worked with her. And it was, enormously helpful. Yeah.
Well, and what was it like? And I just mean that in a general sense, whatever you're comfortable talking about, just for our listeners, if they've gone through some kind of grief and they're thinking, perhaps I should talk to somebody, but maybe they're a bit worried or scared of what might go on if they've never accessed that kind of support. What would that process be like for them?
I think the most cathartic thing of all was I was able to talk about her.
Right.
I suppose it's great to have friends to talk to, mm-hmm. But sometimes friends give their opinion.
Right.
You should do this. You should do that. Yeah. And when you're speaking to a counselor, you're not getting any bias. Yeah. They're facilitating you to express yourself. and yeah, learning the skills to process the depths of my despair and sadness, and turning that energy into work, the joy with my son, and the joy of my daughter, with what I had, being present, becoming more present. But at the same time, being able to be in touch with my loss, or my experience, or what's part of my life, who I am now, who the all the bits that added to who I am as a person.
Absolutely. So how it's affected you and made you who you are today.
Yeah. And also the fear, letting go of the fear, and at that time, being able to go forward with my daughter. Yeah. All of that and the above. I don't think I would have been able to be where I am today without the support that I had then.
Yeah, so it was imperative that you processed it in your own way.
It was imperative that I processed it in my own way. And it was also, a lot of people that I met were uncomfortable. People you meet in the street, people would walk across the street to avoid a conversation because they didn't know what to say to me. And so it was up to me. I know this sounds ironic, but it was up to me to make them feel comfortable.
Oh, isn't it? I see it all the time, just with mental health issues as well. If somebody's been off because they've had depression, or they've been suicidal, or, the different varying degrees of issues, and the discomfort is specifically in the British culture, but not only, what do you say to that person? What could someone have said to you that would have supported you? Or what are the types of things people can say? Just because if our listeners are the friend or the partner or the brother or the sister of somebody who's struggling, what are the types of things that are useful?
Yeah, I think the most useful thing is simply, I'm really sorry for your loss.
Yeah.
Just acknowledging
not avoiding
the loss.
It.
And not avoiding, absolutely not avoiding. Yeah, because... so you get that that warmth off someone else. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to, like I don't have to respond if I don't want to, or if I'm too choked up, or whatever my mood is at that moment, but just that they're acknowledging how I feel, and what I experienced. And that's good.
And that's useful to know, because even if the person's reaction isn't a perfect, oh, thank you so much, or let's talk, or something like that's not necessarily a sign of a successful conversation. Just acknowledging, and even if the person just says thank you or gets choked up, like that's still useful within the relationship.
Yeah, because you've reached out.
Yeah,
you've made that connection without. With no demand.
Absolutely.
And
you showed courage and vulnerability yourself.
Yeah, I love that. You showed courage and vulnerability. Yeah, absolutely. Just, I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes even, asking a question, or naming your daughter Elizabeth, or, so because I think people get so worried whether it's a baby or somebody who's passed away, that if we talk about them, it's going to upset that person, when really the only place you could talk about her, it seems, partly was within your therapy, because you didn't have to think about the impact or be worried in that way. So acknowledging and talking about that person can be really comforting to the person who's struggling with grief.
It is. Absolutely, it is. And as I said, the right person, or you need to feel safe, and I suppose you need to feel that it's okay to feel the way you do.
Absolutely.
Because you get, I would get things like, okay, it's, well, this is what happened and it's time to move on. It's like, or someone saying, "Oh, it must be so difficult to get out of bed every day." So I'm just showing you two extremes.
I get it. Yeah. Completely.
Yeah, but the great thing was that it really empowered me to want to help other people. It was the first spark within me that made me feel I've experienced this, and I would love to help other people who are struggling with this experience.
So I'm really curious about that, because I know you work within coaching, counseling, resilience and adversity, and that sort of space. And you've had this absolute tragedy in your life. And so you've had this spark, but what was the transition point into finding sort of your calling and the things that you do now? I don't know what industry you were in before, or if you were working, or what helped you kind of build the building blocks. And then I'm also curious about the impact on your relationship of this event, because it can often be quite challenging. Two questions. Yeah. Start wherever you want.
Yeah. Okay. So the first one was that I got after I had, successful birth of my third child, Abby. Yeah. And I then, when she was, I don't know, a little bit older, I decided I started my foundation in psychotherapy. Okay. Because I wanted to get involved in bereavement work. And I did that. And then I started working in a placement with a Camden Bereavement Trust. And I worked with them. And I wanted to continue in this direction, but my background was in interior design, and I always and my husband and I have to say it was a struggle. We struggled because we grieved quite differently.
Of course, it always happens.
And it was a struggle. And it really impacted on a relationship. But we then, because we had our daughter and there was so much joy, and we got into that pattern, family life. And I have to add, he had two sons from a previous marriage, so we were very close, and we were a nice big family. Mm-hmm. But what happened was I wanted to continue in this new path of career, and he was very against it. Because he felt that I was successful in the work that I did as an interior designer, and I was making a good living, and he didn't think, he felt that it wasn't something I should do, and wasn't supportive of my wanting to change careers. And that really was just impacted on my relationship with him, because I want to spend my life with a man who wasn't supportive of my growth and development, and who my authentic self as a human being.
Do you think his concerns were from a practical perspective of you've invested here, you make good money, that sort of thing? Or do you think there was another layer of, utilizing the adversity that you faced and the trauma that you faced within your work, and that maybe he was less comfortable with that?
I think it was a combination of the two.
Yeah,
for sure. On a practical level, he definitely wasn't. He didn't want to. He didn't want to. He didn't want to have to
change your lifestyle.
Spend the money. Yeah. And I suppose maybe he was frightened of the changes it would bring. Who knows? Of
course. Yeah.
I never asked him the question.
But it impacted.
But it led. Yeah, it was a slow journey, but it led to our divorce.
Got it.
Because I didn't continue doing what I wanted to do. I did go back into the interior design world, and carried on, working with people in that way, which is still, overcoming adversity, because, couples tend to argue a lot when they're trying to, to
decorate.
Yeah, especially, yeah. But anyway, and I got involved in advertising and giftware, and I enjoyed that, and I had lots of fun. And I being the kind of person that I was, I just looked at the positive and got involved with that. But we did divorce, and I did continue I got involved in the kitchen industry, and I spent many, many years designing kitchens. And during that time, I met and married my second husband. And very sadly, about 8 years into our relationship, he developed cancer.
Oh my goodness.
And just wasn't able to beat it. And so that was an 18-month journey.
Which is very quick.
Yeah. It didn't seem so at the time, but if you think back now, very quick. Yeah. So it just kept, it came first, and then, he went through, operation, and then chemo, and then, we thought, great, yeah, beat that. And then sadly, very quickly, it came back, and he had more aggressive treatment, which, there were lots of complications along the way. And then finally, on the third came back again, and they said to him at that point, "You've got, a 5% chance of survival." And that, that was an incredible experience of love and support, of opening up the world of the doctors and the nurses and the carers that are in the industry, that they're such a purpose, and for me, the most important thing was being there to help him get well. And when we realized that he wasn't going to get well, just to be able to be there and give him the love that he needed to pass on.
Wow. How the hell did you cope?
Yeah, I have such pain in my chest now. How did I cope? Everything in my life include, how did I cope? By focusing on what I needed to focus on. So I was very much in the present. At that point, I had been involved. I got involved with mindfulness. I was involved. I did some courses with a company called Mindfulness Without Borders, who teach secular mindfulness and social and emotional learning. And so that helped me a great deal. Again, support of very good friends. Mike, my husband, Mike, who was suffering with the cancer, and he had an enormous group of very good friends who were so supportive to him. And I just took day by day, each day. My kids were great. Life was just
one
about
day at a time.
I gave up work. Yeah, I gave up work. The company I was working with at the time were also so supportive, and they just said, of course, do what you need to do, and when you're ready, come back. So I was really, really fortunate. There was a great team at that time of managers and directors. So it was just about day to day and I was really focused on his needs more than my own. But I managed. I mean, I guess it was just courage. Again, courage.
Was there a delayed reaction for you? So I don't mean, of course, there was sadness and pain throughout completely, but I guess I mean another crash or a rock bottom at some point, maybe much later than when he passed, when your courage was spent, and you didn't have to focus on those day-to-day needs of him, and life had changed again. Sometimes I've noticed with people that I've interviewed that that's when the rock bottom occurs, or the new perspective. And it might be that you've then sparked the drive to build what you've now created.
First of all, I think that I always felt that I would be okay because of the loss of Elizabeth. I thought I would be able to cope better with the loss of Mike. But actually, that's not true.
It's just different, right?
I thought I would be really prepared. It's just different. And actually, your pain is cumulative.
Oh, that's what I mean. It builds up.
Yeah. So, but because of that moment in that bar all those years before when I felt, am I ever going to be free and happy and carefree again? And I did get there. I did get there in the net, I did get, obviously as you get older and you experience things, you might not be as carefree, but I did experience
joy.
Happy. I did experience great happiness, and I did laugh again, and I put that, I used to think your happiness and sadness is, it's like an elastic. And if your elastic has stretched deeper in sadness, you have the capability of stretching higher in the opposite direction with happiness. And that's, if you could sort of see that metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I always, in my pain and despair of my beautiful, lovely, he was the most wonderful person you could imagine. I did feel that I would eventually be able to, it won't hurt as much as it does right now.
So you knew from experience that time sort of changes things. It changes your state.
Yeah. I have to tell you, I still cry to this day. And he's been passed, almost, over 10 years now. And there are times when, you hear a song or you think of something or you see something familiar and it catches your heart. But, it's not as much and you can navigate skillfully through everyday life.
You can bounce back quicker.
And you can bounce back and be resilient, and it's made me stronger and more resilient. And I think that it was that experience that really made me think, I want to have more purpose and meaning to what I do and working with people. I just continue designing spaces for other people. I love doing it for myself, and it's a great thing for me to do myself. But for me, I realize that what's meaningful and what's purposeful for me is taking all this experience that I've had, and for me to learn the skills to be able to help people. And as I said, navigate through challenges and adversities that we all face
absolutely do
in life.
And are you able to separate your pain from other people's pain? How do you manage that?
Yeah, how do I manage that? I think I'm able. The empathy, I can really understand what they're experiencing, but when I'm whoever it is, whether it's friends or clients or colleagues or, anyone I'm working with, facilitating workshops, it's about them. Mm-hmm. It's not about me.
Absolutely.
I don't. I'm not in my own personal headspace, I've been able to reflect on perhaps what they're saying has impacted me, but I probably, if it's a struggle, I would be able to do that at a later time. And when I'm working or, talking with someone of their experience, it's about their experience. I don't.
Absolutely.
I don't know if it's third person listening. I don't stay in first person, it's about them.
But there is something beautiful about making it about them, but the undercurrent connection that pain can bring us. So that empathy, as you spoke about it, I know when I hear of traumatic stories that people might tell me, it does tap into previous pain, and I connect with it in a deep and profound way that allows me to be a pretty good listener and support for people. So I don't know, and you might answer this question, I don't know for me, if I hadn't had the pain that I've gone through, if I'd be in the position that I am to support people in the way that I do, because it's less about theory and more about like heart. And I'm just wondering for you, yeah. Right? It makes such a difference.
Without a doubt. Yeah, of course. Because it's about experience. It's about connection with other people.
Absolutely.
Isn't it? And
it is.
Yeah. It's about.
And I guess it's making people realize that they're not alone. That's what's made me want to do this podcast, and because I was so isolated, 12 years ago when I was suicidal, that I just felt like I was the only one in the world that felt that way. And so there is something beautiful just about hearing your story and hearing of the immense challenges that you've been through and how you have channeled them into good, so into giving back, into supporting other people. Because I think everyone would totally understand if you decided to stay under your duvet for the next 10 years, but somehow you haven't.
I chose life. And you can go under that duvet and hide from the world, but I chose life. And actually what really worked for me was I also feel that I want to live my life for Mike.
Beautiful.
He didn't get the opportunity to continue all the dreams, and he had so many of what he wanted to do, and he died a young man. And it's like, I want to live, I want to embrace, everything I can for him as well, because he didn't get that opportunity. And it's so precious, and I'm so grateful of every single day that I'm so healthy and that I'm able to, because sadly there are so many people who can't, so choose life, and
be grateful for the life that you have.
And whatever that is for you, the word, whatever that might look like. And everybody's got their own, their own
version of what success or happiness looks like. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Wendy, thank you so much for your story. I mean, it's incredible just to hear what you've been through and how you've channeled it into your purpose. If people want to work with you or connect with you in any way, where can they find you?
Well, my website is the Sage Plan. So they can look at my website, or I have a Facebook page, which is the Sage Plan. I've got an Instagram, which is the Sage Plan.
So I'll link into that. Sounds like you're the Sage Plan everywhere. You've got the best surname of all time.
I am very fortunate with that. Yeah.
But we'll add in your website and details into the podcast show notes. Until then, Wendy, thank you so much for your time. And I think our final thought is choose life. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you so much. It's been so wonderful to speak with you.
Thank you so much for listening. If something helped you today, please do share this episode with a friend and let them know that they are not alone. I know that for me, isolation kept me stuck much longer than I needed to be. So let's practice courage and talk to someone about what's going on, as that's the first step to making life amazing. Check out my website, petravelzeboer.com, for your free Kickstarter plan, which will teach you to turn your biggest weaknesses into your greatest strengths. Join the community of people who are changing the way they view life's challenges and living life to the full. Until next time, goodbye.